My hair has multiple personalities again today. Somebody around here has to. All right. Dude, I look like Einstein. I could be like the not yet silver Einstein. So, how was your weekend so far? Are you up yet? Because it's early for a Sunday morning. It really is. We are starting a brand new chapter, chapter 8. We're still in part 2, and this one is called The Intersection of Race and Power. Now, you guys know, if you follow my page, that I steer let me rephrase that. I stay laser focused on the niche that I work in. But that does not mean that the principles of abuse do not apply to many other aspects of government, politics, racial interactions, sociological, everything. I just choose to stay focused on just one small niche of that. I actually got a super kind and encouraging message from someone that I haven't seen in decades, but we went to grad school together, and she's now a pediatrician. And she messaged me just yesterday saying, I know that you don't talk about politics on your page, but the stuff that you post has really opened my eyes to how large-scale deception and abuse is perpetrated on the masses in various forms of government. She didn't specify which side of government or even whether it was American government that she was talking about, although I could probably kind of read through the lines. But political alliance is not my point. My point is that people in power tend most often to use that power to push others down and to abuse others, regardless of the form of political governance, regardless of the nationality, the ethnicity. It is a human problem. And there's much I could say out of personal conviction related to race relations and politics and so on. I know that if I drift into talking about all of those things, there's a chance that I will lose people in the domestic violence category that I am directly called to help, and that it will be in some ways a distraction from those specific ones in danger that I'm called to help. And I'm saying that very carefully because I don't think that talking about those other big issues are a distraction necessarily. I just have chosen to keep laser focused on intimate partner abuse, family abuse, domestic violence, and so on, and abuse in the church, specifically in the faith community. Anyway, so that's just a little background for where I come from personally. However, I am not going to skip the next chapter in our book as we are going through Diane Langberg's book. I'm going to go ahead and read through it, and this is my caveat that I know race relations and race and power is an explosive topic. Even more so, probably, more people think they have an opinion on it than they do on domestic violence and marital abuse. So, healthy dialogue in the comments underneath, fabulous. No attacks, no name calling, no denigrating, no bashing, no bringing political alliances into the stuff underneath in the comment thread. Just talk about the subjects at hand. And if all of us take Diane's advice and we listen and we are willing to hear where other people are coming from and seek to find common ground, I think we can have healthy discussions here on my page. So that's kind of my ground rules. If that's cool with you, just drop me a comment and say, yeah, I'm in for healthy, supportive, exploratory dialogue or something. You don't have to use those big words. All right. Also, tell me where you're watching from. because that's always fun to go and read through the comments and see where everyone's coming from. The intersection of race and power. Deep within the darkness of a womb, a little one is being carefully, lovingly knit together by our Father's hands. The child is a gift created in His likeness, intended to bring Him glory and bless His world and its inhabitants. When He has finished knitting, the Father wraps this tiny gift in beautiful black skin, and she enters the world. Grievously, as she will discover, not everyone in her world sees her as her Father does. James Baldwin says in Notes of a Native Son, "Black is a terrible color with which to be born into this world." Baldwin's observation tells us that something has gone horribly wrong in our world. The statement reflects a message that many have received from both secular and Christian culture, a message the author heard in surround sound. Baldwin's experience in this world made the Father's love appear to be a lie, His gift devalued. Lies about our Father, whether taught by word or deed, are diabolical, and many of those lies have been taught and internalized. I see someone posts, "I have PTSD nightmares from abuse. It's so helpful to wake up to this." I love that. Not that you have nightmares, but that it is helpful to wake up to this. That makes this worth it. And I see we have someone watching, Karen from Adelaide in South Australia. It's Sunday night there, and Georgia, and others saying they're in for a good conversation. We have Tennessee and Texas. I love this. All right, moving forward. Welcome to all of you guys. It's striking to note how hostile the conversation can get when considering issues of race and the abuse of power. That's exactly why, we have someone from Alaska too, welcome. That's exactly why I gave that caveat at the beginning of this video. Sadly, this is no less true in Christendom than elsewhere. Name-calling, labeling, and demeaning language are used as weapons. Someone tells the story of their experience and they are quickly accused of falsehood, victimhood, socialism, unchristian beliefs, and weakness for not getting over it. We have Brisbane, Australia too. I love my Aussie audience, you guys. Hey, we just got a book that I co-wrote with Darren Pratt called Myths We Believe, released in Amazon Australia. It's taken like a year and a half to get it available over paperback in Australia, but it is now in Oz. And if you scroll down on my page, click over to my page, not right now while we're in a video, of course, but click over to my page and there's a link. The Oz link is there. So, minor little side note there, because I'm super happy. I just got the news yesterday that it is now available in paperback in Oz. All right, back to our topic. Let me be clear. There is no excuse for believers in Christ to speak this way to one another or to non-believers, no matter the topic. Any encounter with another human being needs to be grounded in two foundational truths. We've already hinted at the first. You will never meet, talk to, walk with, or work beside a human being who has not been purposefully knit together by the hands of our Father. Never. Everyone designed by our Father is precious, and He calls us to treat each other as such, as members of the human race created by our God and dearly loved. We are all one race, the human race, and in that race, all are image bearers. There are no exceptions. In Acts, Paul says, God made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth. For in Him we live and move and have our being. We are indeed His offspring. Jonathan Blanchard, that's Acts 17:26 and 28. Jonathan Blanchard, the first president of Wheaton College, as well as an abolitionist, coined the phrase one bloodism in reference to this scripture passage. You will never meet a human being with whom you do not share the blood of Adam. The second foundational truth is rooted in the incarnation and tells us how to walk with and love with one another. John 1:14, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld His glory, full of grace and truth. Hey from Michigan, Margaret. We are always to walk as Christ did. To treat anyone as less than is to defy the Father's judgment about who they are, violating the first truth. To treat others as less than is also to fail to look like Jesus in this world, violating the second truth. If we want to understand others, we must do as he did. He put on our flesh and entered our world, becoming like us and experiencing what our lives are like. In doing so, he became the hope of our salvation. But life, his life, was also the greatest act of listening and of entering into the world of another that has ever been. He has called us to follow him in his ways. Now, I'm just going to stop and do a caveat here because I've gotten some feedback that you guys like it if I stop and explain some things or expound on some things sometimes. When Diane is talking about, the author is talking about never treating others as less than, she very clearly is not talking about ignoring abuse, ignoring violence, or refusing to bring perpetrators of harm to justice. What she's talking about is that innate attitude of others being less human or less valuable or less intelligent simply because they don't agree with you. For example, if you say, oh, well, the other side of this political party, the other political party, no one has a brain. That's demeaning. It's devaluing their humanity. It's refusing to acknowledge the image of God in those who believe differently than you do. Now, in a comment like that, you're not, and I see these kind of comments all the time, especially in the current political climate. A person who makes that kind of comment is speaking out of superiority, arrogance, maybe even insecurity, but they are not speaking out of the love of Christ. They are not speaking out of humility in addressing the image of God in someone they disagree with. And they're not actually addressing the topic that they find problematic. And I have absolutely no issue addressing controversial topics. If you've been around my page long enough, you know that I have no problem calling out books, teachings, issues, damaging belief systems. But the way that we do that, and I don't always land right on the mark, but we strive to do that in a spirit that reflects Christ, honoring the other human while disagreeing or exposing the sin or the damaging teaching or the abuse, and challenging the issue without devaluing the human. Doing that in a way that is an honor to the image of God in the other person, and recognizing God has formed this other person with his hands just as much as he has formed me, even though we do not view the world the same. And honoring them in our spirit and our attitude and our tone. It's hard when we see things happening that we can have volatile emotions about, and we can have an instant, like, oh, it gets my righteous indignation boiling. But we have to remember the imago Dei, image of God, in the other person, and address the core issue. Stick with the issues. I see a good comment here. It's confusing because oppressors and abusers don't operate in the image of the Father, especially those that work under the clergy title. Oh, girl, yes. That is so true. But we are called to do that anyway. We're also called to be wise as serpents, not wise as serpents, but wise as serpents and harmless as doves. That means being smart, being strategic, being intelligent about it, not getting down in the mud and wrestling with someone who has no intention of leaving the mud puddle, but honoring the image of God in them while we expose the deeds of evil. It is a challenging line to walk. And I'm not claiming to nail it perfectly. I'm just saying this is the goal. This is what we reach for. Okay, enough digression. Let's get back to the book. Where was I? Issues around race have set up and toppled kingdoms. They've led to fences and ovens and deportation and slavery. We have used the beautiful diversity our God created as a tool to gain power and to oppress. The fruit of these actions is corrupt, life-destroying, and demonic. Many long for this to change so the world can witness Christ followers who are full of grace and truth rather than disdain and division. I'm no expert on these issues, but I have spent decades wading through the rubble caused by injustice, hatred, the abuse of power, and generational trauma. It is a path of great pain, one that breaks the heart of our Father. Look honestly at history. We have participated in the rejection and contempt of others based on race. The dignity, humanity, and value of one created in the image of God had to be denied or minimized in order for slavery to survive for more than 2 centuries in America. It does not take much thought to realize that damage was also done to slaveholders and to those silently complicit as well. Consider the story of Celia, a slave. Celia was purchased by Robert Newsom at the age of 14. Newsom's purpose in buying her was not so she could be a field hand or a domestic servant. He wanted a replacement for his dead wife in the marital bed. Newsom was 60 years old. He deceivingly presented her as a servant for his daughters. She was, in fact, a slave and concubine. If you have read about slavery in the United States, you know that rape was almost always part of the narrative for female slaves. All women were relatively powerless in the South, but a young female who was black and also a slave was triply vulnerable. Rape was against the law, but that law applied only to white females. Celia was raped for 5 years. Celia had 2 children by Newsom and became pregnant with a 3rd. She tried to get Newsom to stop raping her. He refused, so she hit him with a large stick and accidentally killed him. She burned his body in her fireplace, hoping to hide what had happened, but she was brought to trial before a jury of 12 white men. Her defense was considered radical because if extenuating circumstances were factored in, it would pose a great threat to slaveholders. The institution of slavery was, however, protected. She was found guilty and hanged on December 21, 1855. This happened in the same country that had declared less than a century prior, all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Clearly, there were exceptions to that grand pronouncement. At that time, all the laws favored white males. They were the only ones with the power to create them, enforce them, or change them. Slaves had no recourse and no power. What do you think Robert Newsom was doing to his own soul by owning humans as if they were chattel, raping at will, and destroying the life of an adolescent girl? What damage did he do to Celia? She was crushed, oppressed, raped, powerless, and voiceless. She was treated as a thing to be used by her master as he willed. His abuse of power is stunning. What damage was done to her 3 children who were left motherless? How did they carry the story and its outcome? Did what happened to their mother escalate their fear as slaves? Did it harden their hearts? How do you suppose the children of the woman who murdered the master were treated by others? I know stories about my family from much further back than 1855 when Celia was hanged. Those stories have shaped me. I have told them to my children and grandchildren. I suspect many of you could say the same. The story of Celia from over 165 years ago is out there somewhere today, passed on to a new generation and still bearing fruit. In the early 1950s, I was 4 or 5 years old when my family drove from Virginia to Florida to visit my father's grandmother. We drove all night. Christine came with us. She was our maid and babysitter. She was black, and I adored her. My brother and I slept during the night with our heads in her lap while my parents took turns driving. In the morning, we pulled up to a restaurant. I looked out the window and saw 2 water fountains. A sign above one said whites only, above the other, colored only. I asked what that meant. Christine told me. My mother left us in the car and went into the restaurant. She returned, weeping, got in the car, and said insistently to my father, "Drive." Now, my father rarely got angry, but when he did, you could tell because the right side of his mouth would turn down. He nodded to my mother, his mouth turned down, and we left. Why? Because the restaurant would not serve Christine. My parents were angry and heartbroken and refused to give the owners their business. We went without breakfast as we drove through the South. This was 80 years after emancipation. If such an experience profoundly affected me, and it did, what do you think such repeated experiences have done through the years to those whom the colored only sign referred? Why were subsequent protests necessary in order for image bearers of God to be granted the right to sit at a table or ride a bus? Many of those rejected will share the heavenly table spread for us by our God. Are we not to look like him now? We'll pick this up tomorrow with the abuse of power and generational trauma and the restoration of beauty, and then healing generational trauma. And we'll take it further. This is a huge topic, and I hope it's one that we can continue talking about because it is directly relevant, even if it's not something that I normally host comment threads on my page. But it has everything to do with the mindset of the abuse of power that we're addressing. Tell me what you think. Tell me how it hits you. Maybe chew on it for a little while and then come back and talk about it. Kathy asks, am I reading at the same time every day? I try, but it is not exact, I'll be honest. I'm a mom. We have a family. My schedule's kind of got to flex. But it's usually between 6 and 7 in the mornings, Eastern time. Because here in Tennessee, it's usually around 6:30-ish, between 6 and 7. But you can always catch it over on my YouTube channel if you want to replay, or you can go to the videos and you will see the episodic series, all the episodes in the series for Redeeming Power under Jesus Bubble. If you want to catch all of them, we're on 23 today, so there's quite a few. All right, drop me a comment, share it. If you want to keep the comments going on your own page, if you want to host this discussion among your friends, and we will see you tomorrow morning.